In April of 1841, Silas Rutledge made an announcement that even the hardiest plantation owners in South Carolina could not dismiss. He was placing his daughter, Catherine, 28 years old and unmistakably heavy in build, under the complete authority of an enslaved man named Ezekiel Cross. Not as a nurse, not as a companion, as an owner in every way that mattered, except on paper. The white society of Colleton County was scandalized. They whispered. They judged. They claimed they were concerned. But none of them understood what Rutledge was truly doing, or what Ezekiel Cross would do to Catherine over the following months. By November, Catherine's body looked different, changed in ways no one could explain. And Cypress Grove Plantation was nothing but ash. What really happened between that enslaved man and the plantation owner's daughter? What did he do to her? What forced him to do? What terrified everyone who witnessed it? Before the answers arrive, the story must begin where the records can't fully reach. The heat and the river. Spring and Colleton County arrived together, oppressive heat and humidity that made the air feel solid. The Combe River slid through the low country like something alive, its dark water reflecting Spanish moss draped from live oaks like funeral cloth. Rice paddies stretched for miles. Flooded fields required bodies in the water from dawn until dusk. Prosperity, here, was built on suffering, wealth extracted from human misery. And those who profited from it convinced themselves cruelty was simply the natural order. Cypress Grove Plantation sat on 800 acres of moderately productive land. Rutledge was not quite elite, but he wanted desperately to be. He owned 58 enslaved people, which made him wealthy enough to survive, and ambitious enough to crave more. The truly powerful families owned thousands of acres and hundreds of slaves. Their names traveled through Charleston. Their children were sent away to institutions in the North. Their reputations could open doors, or close them permanently. Silas Rutledge had married Elizabeth Yancey in 1812. Elizabeth had been practical, methodical, keeping meticulous records as if life itself could be tallied. She died in 1813, giving birth to Catherine. For 20 years, Silas raised Catherine alone. And while others in Colleton County learned the rules of society by moving through salons and formal dinners, Silas learned something else: how to pursue acceptance through control. Catherine, the mad daughter. Silas's daughter grew up isolated. Tutors filled her days, but she never fit comfortably anywhere. By 1841, Catherine was 28 years old, and her body reflected years of medication meant to correct what doctors labeled as sickness of the mind. She was described as hysterical, nervous, unstable. She endured violent fits, screams, throwing things, days when she seemed to vanish into herself. The community treated it like tragedy. Some called it shame. Some called it providence. The white society of Colleton County whispered about poor Catherine with false sympathy. If anyone pitied Silas, it was because his daughter was considered helpless. But no one knew the truth. None of them knew what Catherine had witnessed when she was 12. And none of them understood that what looked like madness to outsiders was, in Catherine's mind, a rational response to living beside monsters. A letter opener's scar across Silas's left hand had appeared the previous year after Catherine attacked her father during one of her rare lucid moments. Even that was dismissed as proof that she could not be trusted. No one asked what her lucidity might be pointing toward. The letter, April 7, 1841. On April 7th, a private courier delivered a letter. 3 pages. Expensive paper. Sealed with red wax stamped in a symbol Silas recognized immediately. A scythe crossed with wheat stalks, the mark of the Brethren of the Harvest. The Brethren was not a religious society in the ordinary sense. It was a closed brotherhood of 13 men gathered in darkness to perform rituals they believed strengthened the land through blood sacrifice. Their practices blended old European myth with beliefs carried, carefully, quietly, by enslaved people who understood that certain forces could be shaped. They believed strength was meant to consume weakness when needed. Not metaphorically. Not symbolically. Silas had been initiated years earlier, back in 1822. He had attended perhaps 40 gatherings across 19 years. Some were disturbing. Others were monstrous. The letter informed him he was in debt, $12,000 accumulated through gambling losses and failed investments. Repayment would require selling most of his land and all of his enslaved people. Ruddled's world would collapse. But the letter offered an alternative. It was a demonstration of commitment. A public humiliation. Silas would take his daughter Catherine and place her under the complete authority of one of his enslaved men. Not temporarily. Not as punishment. A permanent transfer lasting 1 full year. Under it, Ezekiel Cross would have control over Catherine's daily life, her access, her movements, her treatments, the way she was handled in private and public. Silas would announce it at a gathering of Colleton County's prominent families. He would explain it as an extreme medical measure. He would destroy his daughter's dignity in front of witnesses, who believed white women were protected above all others, because humiliation was part of the payment. In return, the brethren would forgive his debt and support him financially, restoring his position so he could climb back toward the elite. Silas accepted. The candle burned low. His signature appeared in the wax-dark paper. Then he sent the letter before dawn. 3 days later, another courier arrived. Ezekiel Cross, age 33. Purchased through intermediaries from a Virginia plantation. Skills listed as carpentry and herbal medicine. Temperament, quiet, obedient. What the letter did not say, what Silas did not know, was that Ezekiel Cross had been chosen deliberately for this purpose, and that Ezekiel carried his own need for justice. Not sudden. Not impulsive. Patience, built like a weapon. The arrival, April 13th. Ezekiel arrived April 13th in a wagon driven by a slave trader named Henderson. The wagon pulled directly to the main house rather than the barns, which immediately told Silas something unusual was happening. On the wagon bed sat Ezekiel. Silas noticed his eyes first. Most enslaved men learned quickly that direct eye contact invited danger. They looked down, as survival demanded. Ezekiel didn't. He watched Silas like a person assessing a tool. Ezekiel was tall, lean, and hard-shaped by labor. His skin showed fewer scars than expected, which made him stand out in a region where violence left marks easily. His clothes were simple, clean. His hands were calloused, but his fingers suggested precision, not merely brute force. Henderson handed Silas papers. Ezekiel Cross was transferred quickly. The transaction language barely mattered. The intent was clear. Silas asked him directly, controlling his voice so it wouldn't betray discomfort. Ezekiel answered the way a person answers when he expects to be tested. "Yes, sir. My daughter is unwell. You will be responsible for her care." Silas believed he was buying obedience and medicine. He did not realize he was purchasing a plan. Ezekiel was placed in a small cabin near the main house. He was given supplies. Then his duties were scheduled to begin the next day. Silas made clear what failure would mean. Ezekiel nodded. But once the formalities ended, his expression changed. In private, he unwrapped a worn cloth bundle hidden inside his shirt. Inside were names written on fragile paper, names in a child's uncertain hand. Sarah Benjamin Ruth. His wife, his son, his daughter, sold away years ago. He had learned then that families sold from his world did not return. They disappeared into untreated fever, into infections that did not forgive, into quiet starvation of the spirit until bodies gave up. Ezekiel folded the paper and stared at the ceiling while the house settled around him. Then he began planning what came next. April 14th, inside Catherine's room. A house slave named Judith brought Ezekiel to Catherine's room on the second floor. Judith knocked reluctantly. "Miss Catherine, your father has brought someone to help with your treatments." From within came a crash against the wall, heavy and angry. Then Catherine's voice, slurred but venomous. "I do not want more treatments. Send him away." Judith paused. She looked at Ezekiel with sympathy. "She has bad days. This is one." Ezekiel stepped into the room and closed the door so Judith could not follow. The chamber was large but dark. Curtains drawn tight, as if daylight itself might trigger something unpleasant. The air carried rot, stale sheets, old medicine, and something metallic beneath it. Catherine sat by the fireplace wrapped in a dressing gown stained from years of illness. Her hair hung tangled. Her face was swollen. Her hands trembled continuously on the chair arms. She looked at Ezekiel as if he were an insult, something unfamiliar dressed as help. "Were you?" "No, miss. I'm not a doctor. My name is Ezekiel. Your father asked me to help you." "Help?" Catherine laughed sharply. "That is what they all say. They mean poison. They mean chains. They mean silence." Then she swayed slightly, eyes narrowing. "I know what this is. Punishment again. For remembering. For refusing to forget." Ezekiel did not move suddenly. He asked questions that sounded like calm, but were sharp like blades. "What are you supposed to forget?" The moment caught Catherine off guard. Her anger flickered, exposing something vulnerable underneath. "I don't know. Only that your father says I'm unwell. And everyone else agrees." Ezekiel guided Catherine toward truth without announcing it. He pulled open the curtains. Sunlight flooded in. Catherine cried out and covered her eyes. When she lowered her hands, Ezekiel asked her something that mattered. "When did you last go outside?" Her answer was immediate. "I cannot walk far. I'm too weak." "When did you last eat without that minute dose of medicine?" "The medicine is necessary," she insisted. "Doctor prescribed." Ezekiel challenged her in a way that felt like danger. What if the doctors are wrong? What if everything you were told about your condition was designed not to help you, but to keep you controllable? Silence filled the room, like smoke. Then Catherine's eyes sharpened. She studied Ezekiel with a clarity that frightened even Ezekiel. He was not from here. "Do you know what happens in this house? What they do below?" Ezekiel's pulse moved faster, but he kept his voice steady. "I don't know what you mean." "Liar," Catherine said. "The truth is easier than pretending, but no one here wants it." Ezekiel pressed forward, carefully. "If I'm lying, then explain something. Why would a healthy woman become like this without someone working hard to make it so?" Catherine went still. Her trembling slowed. When she spoke again, her voice sounded different. "Clearer." "He told you?" "Your father told me nothing, miss. But I have eyes." Then Catherine tested him. "This is a trick. You're testing me." Ezekiel did not deny it. He redirected it into a promise. "If you let me help you, you can become clearer. Strong enough to walk beyond this room. But it won't be easy. Your body has depended on those medicines for years. Stopping will bring pain before relief. And your father won't approve. So why would you do it?" "Because I have my own reasons," Ezekiel said. "And the best way to make Silas Rutledge suffer is to return a daughter who can remember and speak." Catherine absorbed it, then nodded slowly, like someone making a decision she had been preparing for years. The brethren, her tone implied, was not something she knew fully yet. But she already understood enough. "You want revenge on my father?" "Yes, miss." "Then what did he do to you?" "He sold my family, my wife, my children. sent them to their deaths to prove something to men who value cruelty as proof of power. Catherine listened without interruption. Then she spoke, steady and terrible. The brethren. He sold them for the brethren. Not as a question. As certainty. Catherine laughed once, too sharply. You don't know what I know. You will learn. But Ezekiel did not flinch. He offered something more dangerous than violence. An alliance. If we are conspirators, use my name. No one can hear it by accident. We must be careful. Catherine had learned violence before. She had already killed people who might have told her father about her lucid moments. They disappeared. Their families were told they ran away. Catherine's smile was thin. So if you plan to betray me, dispose of me, know this. I am not a victim. I'm something worse. That made Ezekiel's spine tighten. He had expected an ally. He hadn't expected someone whose violence might exceed his own. Still, he chose commitment. I believe you, miss. I will not betray you. Then Catherine offered a deal. Let us begin. The treatment, weeks of pain and recovery. Over the following week, Ezekiel began Catherine's treatments. He gradually reduced the medication that had kept her body obedient. He replaced parts of it with herbal tinctures meant to ease anxiety and help her liver process hidden toxins. The process broke Catherine before it healed her. Fever, shaking, vomiting. Days when she couldn't stop being sick. Ezekiel stayed near her, patient, present. When the worst passed, Catherine's eyes stayed sharp. The tremor in her hands decreased. Her speech cleared. She could focus on reading again. Then came the real work. Ezekiel trained her body to move, walking short distances first, then farther, exhausting her, but building her strength. He adjusted her diet carefully, leaner meals instead of heavy comfort foods that would undo discipline. Catherine fought it at first. Years of dependence made restriction feel like punishment. But she learned. As her body strengthened, their conversations sharpened into something like strategy. Catherine described what she had seen in the cellar when she was 12. She described years of gaslighting afterward, how her father convinced her she invented memories she could not trust, how he made other people believe her illness was a symptom, not a cover. She told Ezekiel about the journal she had kept hidden, dates, times, names, coded descriptions. She told him what she remembered about her father leaving late at night. Visitors with intentions that did not match polite society. Sounds below that should not have been possible. Ezekiel, in return, told her about his family. Sarah, who sang while working and taught their children to read despite the danger. Benjamin, who learned numbers, who could do math that amazed overseers. Ruth, who loved flowers and found ways to make a cabin look gentle. Then Catherine revealed her knowledge of the brethren. Silas did not only sell enslaved people. He bought belonging. Ezekiel learned that Silas had taken his family from Virginia by paperwork, warrant language that turned people into assets. And then Silas had split them. Deliberately. Like a demonstration. You are not responsible for what he does, miss, Ezekiel said, but Catherine corrected him. No, but I am responsible for what I do next. They moved closer to vengeance, without calling it that yet. April 29th, the public announcement. The formal announcement was scheduled for April 29th. 41 people gathered in Cypress Grove's dining room. The county's elite arrived in carriages. Judge Pelham and his wife Eleanor. Reverend Crenshaw and his daughter. Marcus Fanning and his family. A banker named Benjamin Lyle. The meal was elaborate. Oysters, roasted duck, multiple rice dishes, sweet potatoes, fresh bread, a towering cake. Throughout it all, Catherine sat near her father, eating sparingly, speaking only when spoken to. Ezekiel served alongside other house slaves. He moved quietly. He listened. He watched who looked uncomfortable. He watched who pretended nothing mattered. After dessert, Silas rose with practiced control. "Friends," he said, and tapped his glass. "You all know Catherine has been unwell for years. Doctors failed. Treatments failed. Until recently." He gestured toward Ezekiel. 2 weeks ago, I brought in Ezekiel, whose knowledge of herbal medicine helped Catherine recover. As you can see, she is calmer and more herself than she has been in years." Murmurs drifted through the room. Then Silas continued, "But this recovery requires ongoing care more intense than a household can provide. After consideration," he announced, "Ezekiel will assume full responsibility for Catherine's welfare. Complete authority over treatment, daily activities, and living arrangements, effective immediately." The murmur changed tone. Shock. Confusion. Offense dressed as concern. A woman like Mrs. Pelham visibly tightened her face. Marcus Fanning spoke first. "Silas, placing your daughter under a slave's care permanently?" Silas didn't soften. "Catherine's health matters more than social convention." "And if Catherine agreed?" Catherine's eyes stayed steady. "Do you not agree, daughter?" All eyes shifted to her. Catherine chose obedience as performance. "I trust my father's judgment. Ezekiel has been kind, and his treatments help. I am content with this arrangement." Perfectly delivered. But Ezekiel saw the tension under it, Catherine's hands gripping the napkin too hard, her knuckles widening beneath tablecloth fabric. The evening ended in awkward talk. Some guests left early. Others cornered Silas privately, asking questions they didn't want public. By midnight, the house cleared. Catherine retired to her room. Silas returned to his study. Ezekiel cleaned up, then followed the routine his captors expected, until he knocked at Catherine's door. "Come!" Catherine sat by the window, still dressed from dinner, looking out at dark grounds. "It is done, then. I'm officially your responsibility." "Property of property," Catherine said, mocking the phrase her world used like a joke. Ezekiel asked what she intended next. "Burn this house down with everyone in it," Catherine said. "But we must be patient." That was the first lesson of conspiracy. The hidden evidence, the journal and the ledger. Catherine pulled a wooden box from a drawer. Inside were pages in her handwriting. Years of documentation. Dates. Names. Ritual descriptions coded so the words looked like nonsense if someone else found them. "We have enough to destroy them," Catherine said. "But no one will believe a woman described as mad, and an enslaved man described as property." So proof had to become undeniable. She produced one key memory. The Brethren maintains a ledger. They keep records of every ritual, every sacrifice, every member's participation. It keeps them all accountable, equal guilt, equal silence. Silas had once mentioned it. But Catherine had remembered. "Where is the ledger?" "In the cellar. Beyond the main chamber. A hidden room, no one was allowed to enter casually." Ezekiel's stomach tightened. He understood what that meant. They would need to access the core of Brethren territory. Catherine had already calculated timing. Silas traveled to Charleston monthly. The next trip was May 14th. He would be gone for 3 days. That gave them 2 weeks. 2 weeks to learn layouts. 2 weeks to map the cellar entrance. 2 weeks to prepare for silence. Ezekiel asked about guards, keys, and slave schedules. Catherine sketched from memory. Then she and Ezekiel spoke in whispers until close to 2 in the morning. When Ezekiel returned to his cabin, he pulled out the paper with his family's names again and stared into candle light. "I am doing this for you," he whispered. "For Sarah. For Benjamin. For Ruth. And for everyone who suffered because men like Silas Rutledge treated power as permission." Somewhere below Cypress Grove, secrets waited in darkness. And those secrets could tear apart a network of men who had always believed themselves untouchable. copying the truth. The 2 weeks passed with dangerous calm. Catherine continued improving. Her weight dropped. Her mind stayed sharp. She translated sections of her coded journals for Ezekiel, filling gaps about the Brethren's structure. The Brethren wasn't unique to Colleton County. It was part of something larger across the South. Connected societies in Charleston, Savannah, New Orleans, Richmond. Different names, same system. Wealthy men who believed dominance justified sacrifice. Catherine explained it one afternoon in a voice that sounded too flat for what she described. They mix European mystery cult traditions with beliefs taken and twisted from enslaved people. They turned it into monstrous ideology. Justification for what had no justification. And the sacrifices were not always human, as they liked to pretend. Sometimes animals. Sometimes people. Sometimes people who could be erased without consequence. Enslaved people without family. Poor whites who wandered onto their properties. Bodies, Catherine said, went into swamps. Alligators did the rest. And the ledger existed because mutual complicity had to be preserved. If someone exposed others, the same person would be exposed back. Everyone equal. Everyone guilty. No one safe enough to confess. Then May 14th arrived. Silas left early, carriage and manservant. Charleston business. Expected return evening of May 16th. Almost 3 full days. At nightfall they moved. By 10, the main house had become quiet enough that a person could hear with subtle and distant insects sing like static. Catherine changed into simple dark clothes, pulling her hair back tightly. She looked ready for something that couldn't be reversed. "Are you certain, miss?" Catherine's certainty didn't waver. "I have never been more certain." They found the cellar entrance behind the pantry. A door disguised to look like paneling. The latch clicked with a sound too small to match what waited beyond. Narrow stairs descended into darkness. The smell hit immediately. Damp earth, old smoke, and something organic turned rotten by time. The cellar was larger than expected. Low ceilings, thick beams, stone-lined walls weeping moisture, packed earth underfoot. At its center was what Catherine called the altar, though now it looked like a heavy wooden table stained by purpose. Dark grooves and stains suggested repeated use. Candle holders lined the walls. Sealed jars sat nearby. Black robes with crimson trim rested in a rack. Shelves held books and papers. Catherine guided Ezekiel without hesitation. She pressed a particular stone in the wall, and the solid surface moved, revealing a hidden chamber. A smaller room, 10 feet square. This was where the Brethren kept what it could not afford to lose. The ledger sat on a wooden stand, massive, bound in leather with metal clasps. Names and dates. Ritual descriptions written like procedures. Clinical language that turned atrocities into documentation. Ezekiel opened the book. He began reading. And horror grew deeper in him with every line. This wasn't occasional cruelty. This was systematic violence tied to agricultural cycles. A pattern disguised as tradition. They killed, and they prepared bodies for ritual consumption, believing power could be transferred by ingestion. Ezekiel's voice broke. "Dear God." Catherine's tone remained calm, as if she had reached this truth years ago and survived it by storing it inside her. "I watched them when I was 12. I watched my father lift a goblet and drink. Then they told me I was insane. They told me I imagined it." For 16 years, she had learned how to keep living while carrying a memory that could not be spoken. Ezekiel turned pages looking for entries about his family. He found them. October 1838. Sarah, Benjamin, Ruth. 3 lines describing purchase and separation. As if lives could be reduced to paperwork. Ezekiel wanted to burn everything on sight. But Catherine corrected him. "If we take it now, they'll know immediately. Copy the important entries first." So they worked for hours, building a case out of paper. Catherine provided sheets. Ezekiel recorded victims and rituals. They focused on entries tied to current members, names, and dates that could later be confirmed. Exhaustion became its own kind of terror because every name felt like a new wound. They copied until footsteps echoed on stairs above. Lantern light flared. Not theirs. Brighter than their own. Ezekiel looked up. Silas Rutledge stood in the doorway, calm, too calm, flanked by men. Behind him, more figures appeared in the outer cellar. Silas had anticipated the intrusion. "I admit," Silas said, his voice controlled. "I'm impressed." The confrontation. Catherine stepped forward slowly. She positioned herself between her father and Ezekiel. "You were supposed to be in Charleston." Silas didn't deny it. "I was supposed to be. But Catherine's recovery worried me more than I expected. So I made arrangements. I left this morning. And returned this afternoon." He watched the house all evening. Waiting. Waiting to see if Catherine would remember, if she would try to speak, if she would try to destroy him. Catherine's response didn't shake. "You've been poisoning me for 16 years. Don't pretend you can call it care." Silas moved further into the chamber. His eyes moved between them, like he was measuring angles and exits. Ezekiel understood what was about to happen. The moment a trap is sprung isn't when it begins. It begins when it is designed. Silas gestured. "Bring them upstairs." He needed more than silence. He needed certainty. Locked in the study. Ezekiel and Catherine were separated from the ledger room and taken up. They were placed in Silas's study, along with the other intruding members Silas had brought. The door was heavy oak. Locked from outside. A windowless room, except for a high transom impossible to reach. The message was clear. They could watch. They could wait. But they could not escape. Over the next hour, other voices gathered in the halls. The brethren assembled. Finally, the study door opened. Marcus Fanning entered, grim. "They're ready for you." Ezekiel and Catherine were led back down to the cellar again. But the cellar was not the same as before. It had been transformed. The altar draped in crimson cloth. Candle holders lit in a ring. 13 chairs arranged for ritual purpose. All 13 brethren members had come. Silas stood at the head. "Brothers of the harvest," he said. "Tonight we face a crisis. My daughter and her associate discovered the inner chamber." Judge Pelham spoke, voice measured like a verdict. "Then they must be silenced." Silas disagreed. "Not fully. Not until he had offered a plan. Catherine is blood. I cannot simply dispose of her without exhausting other options." And the man, Ezekiel, represented opportunity. "Opportunity?" Reverend Crenshaw asked. Silas turned toward Ezekiel. "You want revenge on me. You want to destroy me for what I did to your family. I understand. But what if I gave you another kind of revenge? One more meaningful?" Silas's offer hung in the air like smoke. Ezekiel listened without expression, calculating what could be survived and what could not. Silas proposed membership, conditional, unequal, controlled. He claimed the brethren could offer resources, money, information, power, and in exchange, Ezekiel would participate in ritual work that kept the system intact. Ezekiel's family had been destroyed for proving cruelty could be purchased. Now Silas wanted him to purchase cruelty with his own life. It was an obscene transaction. And if Ezekiel refused, Catherine and he would die that night. Their bodies would vanish into the swamp. No one would ever know. Catherine's voice cut through the chamber. "Don't." Ezekiel's eyes shifted to her. She shook her head faintly. "Whatever happens, do not become them." But Silas tried to make it sound like mercy. Catherine, he reminded him, would be dead to the community if she spoke. No one would believe a woman like her. So the only power left would belong to those who controlled narrative. Ezekiel refused to surrender his future to their terms. Then Catherine corrected the direction again. She would not pretend ignorance. She would not become quiet because someone else demanded it. If they killed her, she would not cooperate by pretending she had forgotten. Silas's expression hardened. Then you've made your choice. Wait, Ezekiel said quickly. He accepted the deal, on one condition. Catherine goes free. Not back to her room. Not as a prisoner in better clothing. Free. Away from Cypress Grove. Away from South Carolina. Give her money to restart her life. Silas considered. Several members rejected it at first, insisting Catherine was broken. But Judge Pelham offered a cynical answer. Even if she spoke, who would believe her? But a man willing to become complicit. That was valuable. It proved their power could reach even people who hated them. So Silas agreed. Catherine would be sent north under a new identity. A stipend to live. No return to Colleton County. Her old life would be treated like it had never existed. Catherine stared at Ezekiel. Her face showed something fierce and conflicted. Ezekiel interrupted before she could refuse again. She leaves. I join you. A bargain formed in that moment, not for peace, but for survival. The 3 weeks of watching. Catherine departed the next morning at dawn, escorted with tight control. She was not allowed to speak goodbye. Ezekiel watched the carriage disappear into trees from his cabin window. The next 3 weeks were the longest of his life. He was kept under constant watch. Overseers followed him everywhere. He was given meaningless work. Tasks that accomplished nothing except to fill time and reduce the risk of movement. But he also gained access where it mattered. The main house. Silas's study. The cellar where the next gathering would take place. He was watched, yes. But the watchers were also testing. Was he truly obedient? Would he escape? Would he sabotage? Ezekiel did none of those things. He played defeat as a mask. He learned routines. Noticed which overseers were cruel. Noted which brethren members visited regularly. He built a mental map of weakness. And at night, when alone, he understood the real problem. Initiation. Silas had promised it would be tomorrow, at last. The brethren would test him. They would want to make him complicit. They would want guilt that could not be washed away, because guilt was what made people obedient forever. And Catherine, though safe in Philadelphia, was not safe. She would be hiding, planning, waiting. If Ezekiel failed the test, both would die. June 2nd, Silas's private pressure. On June 2nd, after midnight, Silas came to Ezekiel's cabin alone. May I come in? Ezekiel stepped aside. Silas entered, looked around the sparse room, then spoke like a man delivering scripture. Tomorrow you will become one of us. Not fully. Never fully. But enough. The brethren had never lost a member to exposure, Silas said. Not in 43 years. Why? Because everyone was equally guilty. He described the network. The influence. Doors opening. Business opportunities arriving. Legal troubles disappearing. A society more powerful than religion, more powerful than law. And in exchange, Ezekiel would help maintain their natural order, the strong over the weak, the powerful over the powerless. Ezekiel listened, refusing to show fear. Silas tried one last persuasive angle. Your family is dead. Nothing you do will change that. But you can make their deaths mean something. Work from inside the organization to push for less brutal treatment. Advocate for better conditions. It sounded almost like reform. It was a trap dressed as philosophy. Ezekiel didn't respond with betrayal. He responded with quiet resolve. Why are you telling me this? Because having you as an ally is more valuable than having you as an enemy, Silas said. Because I killed your family. "But I don't want to kill you." Then Silas warned him, "Tomorrow night you will be asked to do something difficult. If you hesitate, if you refuse, if you fail, then Catherine will die too." Catherine's, Philadelphia, location, Silas claimed, was a lie. Her survival depended on Ezekiel proving loyalty. "Do you understand?" Ezekiel said quietly, "I understand." June 3rd, the test at midnight. The gathering began at midnight on June 3rd. Ezekiel was brought down to the cellar by brethren members. He was stripped to the waist and tied, hands bound behind his back. He was forced down the stairs into the candlelit chamber, where 13 men waited in ritual robes. Silas stood at the altar. "Brothers of the harvest," he announced, "tonight we conduct an initiation unlike any in our history. We bring in a man who has every reason to hate us. We test whether revenge will outweigh moral objections." The others brought forward a bound figure, a young enslaved woman, terrified. "This is your test," Silas said. "You must participate. You must take the knife and make the first cut. You must prove that your desire for revenge against Gaines is stronger than your objections. If you refuse, you die tonight. If you accept, you live, and you become complicit." The chant began again, rhythmic, unfamiliar, tightening the air with expectation. Ezekiel stared at the bound woman. In her terrified eyes, he saw every person who had suffered in silence. Sarah, Benjamin, Ruth. He saw himself. Then he looked at the knife. Silas held it out as if it were a crown. "Take it," Silas said. "Make the choice." Ezekiel made one. But he did not swing toward the victim. He moved toward the nearest brethren man instead, fast, violent, decisive. The knife flashed. The man collapsed. Chaos detonated through the chamber. Ezekiel grabbed a robe and used it to plunge the room into darkness. Then he moved through the confusion with ruthless purpose. He fought like someone trained by pain. He didn't wait for permission from monsters. He forced doors open with force. He broke candle holders and faces. He crashed bodies together. He used the room against those who thought the room was theirs. A scream split the air. Then the captive woman was free. "Run," Ezekiel shouted. And she did. The second part, Catherine's return. What Ezekiel did not know was that above them, Catherine had returned earlier than anyone believed possible. She had not gone to Philadelphia. She had been hiding among the enslaved quarters, listening, waiting, gathering. When the commotion erupted from below, when the captive woman burst free and screamed upward, Catherine knew the moment had arrived. The reckoning. Catherine had recruited people for weeks, men and women who had nothing left to lose. People who had watched family members disappear. People who had seen the brethren's tradition swallow lives. People whose rage had been stored for generations. They came armed with tools from the fields, axes, hammers, and blades made for labor. They poured into the cellar like a tide. The brethren members still trying to subdue Ezekiel did not understand what they were facing until it was too late. When violence came, it did not pause for mercy. The brethren shouted, tried to fight, tried to command. Judge Pelham tried to use authority one last time. It failed. Reverend Crenshaw pleaded. No one listened. Silas made a final desperate choice. He grabbed Catherine, trying to turn her into leverage. Stop, he ordered, claiming control with a weapon at her throat. Then Catherine looked at him without fear. Kill me, she said. Do it. It changes nothing. Silas didn't understand what obedience meant after 16 years of suppression. Catherine drove forward, breaking his grip. Then she turned and escaped his hold. Ezekiel faced Silas in the cellar's chaos. All the power Silas had held, privilege and cruelty, collapsed under the weight of consequences. You took everything from me, Ezekiel said. You did it without reason, except to prove dominance to men who value cruelty over humanity. Silas answered with entitlement, but it sounded thin. You won't escape what's coming. Ezekiel cut him off. No mercy. Not ever. The enslaved people made sure no brethren survived. 13 men who believed they were above consequence learned too late. Power was an illusion. Cruelty always returns. The evidence, burning proof and erasing the ledger. After it was over, Catherine stood amid bodies, shaking, not from fear, but from release. 16 years of rage had finally found a path. Ezekiel moved toward her. Are you hurt? No. Just minor cuts. He looked around at the cellar, at the altar, the ledger, the papers that could prove everything. What do we do now? Catherine's smile was grim. Now we burn it all. The cellar. The ledger. The evidence. Ezekiel hesitated. Couldn't they take the ledger to authorities? Catherine laughed once, bitter. Justice? If we bring it forward, we disappear before anyone investigates. The network continues in other counties. Survivors hunt us down. There would be no trial. No proof without risk. So Catherine's logic was cold and accurate. This ends only when everyone believes Cypress Grove's chapter died in an accident. When there's no evidence. No witnesses. No story left intact. Ezekiel understood. Then oil was poured. Wood stacked. Bodies placed to make the scene look natural to anyone determined to look away. Before dawn, Catherine and Ezekiel destroyed the ledger and journals. But Ezekiel tore out the pages about his family, protecting what mattered most. So they are not forgotten. Then Catherine set fire to the altar. Flames took quickly, fueled by everything the brethren had tried to hide. Smoke swallowed the cellar. Catherine and Ezekiel ran upstairs and out to the yard. They watched Cypress Grove burn. In the morning, people would arrive. Other plantation owners. Prominent men seeking business. They would find the cellar sealed by death. 13 men lost in the flames. A tragedy, the community would call it. A sad footnote to a society already full of lies. Funerals would follow with full honors. Catherine Rutledge would be reported to have died too, trapped in her room, unable to escape. No one would question it. No one would investigate too deeply. Because those who might have were either complicit or afraid. Most of the enslaved people involved said nothing. They had learned what silence could buy. Survival. Within months, some were sold. Cypress Grove liquidated. People scattered across the region with secrets buried deep enough to survive decades. Years passed. The ruins were demolished. New buildings rose where old horrors had been. Life continued, because that is what societies do when they decide not to remember. But whispers persisted in slave quarters late at night. Stories traveled from mouth to mouth. A legend built around fire. A legend built around revenge. A legend built around the idea that cruelty had limits. That power was never absolute. And then, long after the smoke cleared, history returned like a slow leak. During the Civil War in 1863, Union troops occupied Fiora where Cypress Grove had stood. They found tunnels, bones in nearby swamp water, marks on trees hinting at ritual places. But the war kept moving. An investigation didn't happen the way truth deserves. In 1971, during demolition work, a journal was discovered sealed in a wall. It contained names, dates, and rituals, everything Catherine had once hidden. But the journal was coded. It vanished before anyone could decode it fully. Some said it was destroyed. Others said descendants of brethren families recovered it, protecting their ancestors' secrets. A few believed it still existed somewhere, waiting for the moment someone brave enough finally turned the key. What is known, however, is this. 13 prominent men died in a fire in 1841. Catherine Rutledge disappeared soon after. No body was confirmed. Ezekiel Cross was reported sold to an Alabama plantation, though records never matched what should have existed. And for years afterward, stories circulated among enslaved communities. A network helped people escape, led by a man who had faced monsters, and won. Whether every detail was true or whether parts became myth, no one could say for certain. But what remained was the same lesson repeated in different forms. Power built on cruelty is never as solid as it looks. Secrets kept in darkness eventually find light. And the people called powerless often hold the most dangerous kind of power. The power of memory. The power of refusing to forget. Closing question, call to action. What do you think happened that night? Do you believe everything that was written in those hidden records? Do you think the journal still exists somewhere, still waiting to be found? Leave your comment below. If you enjoyed this thriller-style historical mystery and want more like it, subscribe. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a story. And share this video with someone who likes mysteries where history and horror collide. These stories need to be remembered. These voices need to be heard. See you in the next video.